My position on this, Gidon Ariel, and I am much less authoritative even than the nominally accepted nascent Sanhedrin. And they say that this is not a Jubilee year, because in order to have been so, we would have had to begin thinking about it more than 50 years ago.
But you also have to prepare for a Jubilee year, because then you have basically 2 sabbatical years in a row, which makes growing a problem. You have to store.
My prayer, and I'm willing to go on record because I don't mind being wrong, because who am I all of a sudden? But I think that God is able to create a situation where not only the Sanhedrin, your Sanhedrin, will somehow figure out a way that they will be able to call this the Jubilee year, but everybody will recognize it as well. And this of course is something that is not based on any Jewish legal understanding. I understand that. But God can do anything.
God can do anything. But he also works within a certain amount of rules. But Correct. At the same time, to a certain extent, by us declaring that this is the first year of the counting, we are also saying that this was a Jubilee year of the exile. Why? Because when you're in exile and you don't have a court counting, then the 49th year is the Jubilee year. In other words, while even though this wouldn't have been the 49th year, right? We don't count an extra year for the 50. There's at least one opinion of Rav Yehuda, right? Yes. And so therefore in 50 years, when we, God willing, as a nation, count the Jubilee year, and everybody gets their inheritance back, and all things are restored, or even sooner, right? Or, I mean, also a court can come along that's wiser and bigger and better and say, good job, guys, but we're taking over and moving, and we think that your opinion was wonderful, you did good groundwork, but you missed this point and that point and the other, and I have no problem with that either. Okay, but it has to be done by a court. However, it will kind of acknowledge that this year had a significance of a Jubilee year of the exile, right? Of a exile from the... There's several different levels of exile. There's exile, physical exile of being in the land of Israel, and then there's spiritual exile when Am Yisrael doesn't have their act together, which unfortunately is most of our history.
Yes.
So it's your expectation then that if all went just perfectly well in the future, that after you're counting this year as the first year of the new 7-year cycle, and that if you got to the 50th year, then you would declare that as another sabbatical year. And is that sabbatical, in the opinion of the Sanhedrin, is there a decision about whether that sabbatical year, the 50th year, overlaps with the first year of the next cycle or stands on its own?
We're discussing that right now in various committees and looking at a very last positives. One of the things that we're doing is, what does that mean, a Jubilee year? How does that actually mean to modern life today? Because the main aspects of a Jubilee year involve the returning of the family inheritance and the redemption of slavery, all these various things. So we're actually examining a lot of these various things and what that means. And there's also an opinion, and this is an outside opinion, and it's not the Sanhedrin's opinion, and we're still discussing. But there's an opinion that that there is an actual overlap, that the Jubilee year begins in Nisan. How do you say that in Hebrew?
No, Nisan.
Okay,
it's
in
good.
Nisan, and there is kind of an overlap of ththings, but that's not the standard opinion, and that's just one weird out opinion that I happen to find. I don't actually hold by it either, but because in the tractate of the New Year's, right? That talks about that the month of Tishrei is the new year for years for sabbaticals and for jubilees. I keep wanting to go to Hebrew, so I keep stuttering. Excuse me.
All right.
So it will be discussed over the next 49 years on how it should. And one other question.
And also, we have to prepare logistically. I mean, there's practical considerations, because if the land has to be followed for a year and a half, even if you're not, if you need, and the implication though of calling a Jubilee year implies that all sabbatical years are now Torah obligated Jubilee years. And sabbatical years and not rabbinical, which applies a different level of observance.
Yes.
And makes it much more. Now, there's opinions, by the way, that we're already obligated, Torah-oriented, for a sabbatical year simply because the majority of Jews in the world, or close to the majority, are here. It's true, by the way, that actually Ezra decided that the majority means the majority in Eretz Yisrael. And
that the majority in Eretz Yisrael are the majority in Eretz Yisrael.
Are the majority of the population in Eretz Yisrael are Jews, are Bnei Israel. That's clearly from the text what Ezra holds.
That would be the land of Israel that was under jurisdiction.
Under. That's why only certain parts were under sabbatical year, because only those parts where the Jews were the majority, which was a very small area compared to the first temple period, were actually obligated, which is the whole Rabbi Yehuda about Beit Sha'an, and whether Beit Sha'an is obligated to the sabbatical year or not. Beit Sha'an is clearly in Eretz Yisrael Eretz Yisrael. But because it was the majority of the population in Beit Sha'an was actually non-Jews, and we know this for a fact, during the Second Temple period, they were not Torah obligated at any rate to a sabbatical year. It's fascinating. Mm-hmm. I spent weeks learning this stuff. It was more than weeks. It was of the main opinions that we had as far as when we should start.
It's interesting you mentioned the Balfour Declaration because that actually fits exactly in the same cycle as
we discussed how that fit within the cycle and how things actually, God has His own plan, and things tend to fall into place. God makes things work even when we don't want it to. He takes our enemies' thoughts and turns them on our head to make it work for His plan. And He does that all the time. That doesn't mean that we don't have an obligation to give it our best effort. However, we should know that our best effort is just that, and it's an obligation on our part, not an obligation on God's part to follow our best effort. He'll fit our best effort into His plan.
Can I just have to interrupt you and make a comment here?
Sure.
I find it incredibly refreshing to be talking to a member of the Sanhedrin who has that perspective. Because, when we sit outside in some other country and we think about a Sanhedrin, there's the caricature which comes in our minds is that of a ruling fist, of something of a group that comes together and says this and establishes that. So I find it so incredibly refreshing that you're trying to fit. I mean, many things that you've said here. Anyway, I want to express my gratitude and appreciation for the whole way that you are looking. You're trying to find shalom in all of these things.
That's the purpose. The purpose is finding everybody's mishpat. Mishpat is usually talked about as justice or things, but mishpat is actually also means sentence, and it also is the sentence of a judge. But a mishpat means everything in a sentence. All the words have to be in the right order, and you have to find. But all the elements of that sentence need to be included, and you need to find their right order and who's in front, who's in the middle, who's over here, that's mishpat. And that's what one of the things that King David was good about doing was not only tzedek, which is righteousness, but also mishpat, everything being, and that's shalom. Shalom has to do with everything being in its proper place and being in balance. Now, I hope I'm speaking for the entire Sanhedrin when I say that, and I do believe I am, because part of the goal of the Sanhedrin, the truth is the fact that the Sanhedrin has been in existence for 12 years is a miracle in and of itself, because we have so many different opinions, and we sometimes get into some really, really petty arguments, because all of us are coming from our own place. However, all of us are dedicated to the idea that we need to nullify our own pettiness, and the idea of truth comes out of the collective. It says that when the Sanhedrin sits together, when the judges sit together, then the divine presence rests. And that's because we remove all our baggage, because I hear what you're saying and I can hear the truth of what you're saying and take out your baggage and focus on the truth. Now, we have a lot of personal skills that we need to work on sometimes in the Sanhedrin and our actual work. Sometimes it takes effort, and sometimes I'm frustrated, and because my opinion wasn't the one that was accepted, and whatever. We're all human, but the idea and the ideal, more important, of unity without uniformity, the idea of coming together for a common goal, and the idea of shalom and for God's purpose and for serving God is the central defining purpose of the Sanhedrin. We are there to be an expression as best as possible in this world of God's will. Now, that's fallible. And there's even an entire tractate that talks about when the Sanhedrin makes a mistake. I'm talking about the Sanhedrin in all its glory that sits on the Temple Mount. And what you do when the Sanhedrin makes a mistake as to what the rules are supposed to be. But this is one of the reasons why the requirements for judges are so exacting as to who's supposed to, it's a high level, especially for the high court, as far as the idea of knowing 70 languages and things like this are all wonderful things, but the real idea is that he's not motivated by money and personal greed, that he ideally should have a good family background. Now, why is that important? Because when you grow up in a good family, we know this with this is one of the things that's driving us crazy, and this is one of our issues. When you grow up in a good, harmonious family, right, you're going to be a better citizen. You're going to be a better person. When the family unit is strong, the nation is strong. Not the state necessarily, but the family unit is strong. In fact, the opposite. When you can break up the family, then the state has more power because everybody's an island. But let's leave that discussion to another day. The family. So when you come from a good, healthy family, which is why someone who is a new convert isn't supposed to be a judge, which was a hard thing for me for a long time to deal with, is coming from my background in America and the idea. But why can't he be a judge? Because he's coming from the point of only law. And we see this amongst many converts and also many new returnees, where they're the law. And this is the law. And there's more of a dynamic of family harmony that needs to exist, and a judge needs to be able to. It's the best analogy is the family, because it's said that the head of the household is like a king, and a true king. Not talking about the feudal lords of Europe, but a Jewish king anyway, and the ones that when we say melech. He is supposed to be an expression of the people's will, and the bridge, and also expression of God's will, and the bridge between God and the people. Just like the head of the household is supposed to be a bridge between God's will and the family's will. When it says that a man, the husband, is supposed to look at his wife as part of his own body, because the king has to look at all of the nation like they're part of his own body, as part of his own thing. And just like, we were talking about sugar before. While sugar tastes good to the mouth, it's not necessarily always good for the rest of the body. And a king has to make judicious decisions about the balance between both enjoying the meal and having it be healthy, and so that all of the body works in harmony. And that's a king. And the Sanhedrin is an extension of also that kingship, that judiciary. And that's really what should be running around here now. That's why when King David, saw that the heart of the nation wasn't with him, and they were with Absalom, even though it was wrong and it wasn't the right thing and it was false, he said, he had the ability, he had the power, he could have been a tyrant and said, no, we're closing the gates and not letting them in, and we're going to hold on to what I have, like King Saul did. But no, he says, no, we'll leave for the minute until we get things back into balance. Wow. And we get the thing. Because a leader that doesn't have the heart of the people is not a real leader.